Okay, today's lesson, brushes. Now brushes are, there's a variety of different kinds of brushes. Some of them simulate traditional brushes like watercolor, like big round brushes, calligraphic pens, calligraphic brushes, things like that. Hold on one second here, let me open up the file. This is lesson 10. Let's go into app, no. I have to go on my folder here, and I want to go into public, and here are lessons, and it's lesson 10. So here's the end, and here's the start. There's just two files. We'll go ahead and open those up. Pretty straightforward. So they've provided for us a template. And this is what it's supposed to look like when it's done. So it's pretty simple looking illustration, but you'll see that there are all these leaves up here. This is part of a scatter brush. You can create your own scatter brush. There are several brushes that you could, libraries of brushes that you can load. And what they do is that they follow a path, but they follow a path in a random order. So if I were to select, let's select, is it all grouped together? Hold on one here. Let's try the group selection tool. I'll try to roll over one of these paths, select it, and then move it over. So you can see here's the path. Does everybody see the path? And you see these two leaves. They're actually linked or attached to this path, but in a random fashion. You notice that in this particular instance, the size is uniform, but the rotation is different and the placement is different. And we could do that for each one of these. You can see where there is a path, and the size is a little different, rotation is different. We can also change the color. We're going to do a variety of things. So that's one type of brush. That's a scatter brush. You can also see that there is something called a pattern brush, and that's what this, I'm pretty sure that's the name of it. Anyway, we're going to make one of these too, where you can take shapes and attach them to a path, and they will create it looks like these brushes were applied as individual elements, but in fact this is just one rectangle, and it knows when there is a sharp change in direction and that sort of thing to apply a different shape. They're really pretty cool. You can see the way the trees are made up, that these brushes actually look a little bit more like traditional brushes, meaning when I say traditional, like it could be art brushes or art tools like, as I said, oil pens, watercolor, or oil brushes, watercolor brushes, charcoal, things like that. But when you look at them a little bit more carefully, we can use the direct selection tool. We can select the path, and I can click on the path. I'm not doing such a good job. What am I doing here? I think I goofed it up. Let me undo a few steps. Let me select again the path, and let me zoom in so I can see a little better. Oh, okay, they did something different in here. They actually, let's take this instead. Let's do that. So they did something else to this one. I don't know what they did, but I messed it up. So let me use, again, the direct selection tool again, and I can select a point on the path, and I can move the point. And notice that when I move the point, that the brush follows the path. So it looks spontaneous and random when in fact you have the control of a Bezier curve, so you can make it go in any direction you want and continue to edit it. This is a pretty cool tool too. If we look at this, and you'll see that an effect has been applied to this called scribble. What it is simply, if I were to remove this, so let me take this effects and throw it away. Let me move this around. Got these all discombobulated here. If I were to take this effects and throw it away, you'll see that it's just a rectangle with a solid fill. But with the effects applied, the scribble effects, if I double click on that effect, and that's found under the effects panel, you can see that we can control a variety of things. We can control the angle. We can control the thickness and the overlap. There's no overlap, some overlap. The variation in width. Do you want a lot of variation, some variation, no variation, so that it's all uniform? You can control the stroke width from here, from a fat to a thin stroke. It's pretty cool. Huh? Yeah, I haven't shown you yet. I will. Curviness, really curvy, really angular. And so you can create any number of effects where it looks like a calligraphic pen, where it looks like a marker that's been applied. All very cool. These are all the brushes down here, pretty much the same as what we've already done here. But that's what we're supposed to do here. So I'm going to do this, and it won't be in the same order as the exercise, but you'll get the idea. So let's start with this particular path.
A finished product is similar, has to match.
Pretty close, you know, but I want you to experiment.
Can we add?
You can add stuff, do what you want. It just, let me go ahead and also under Window, I'm going to bring up brushes so you can see. And there are, because of a number of them that we've already used, there are, you can see that we don't have too many loaded right now. Here is the one down here. Let me move this over here. Well, let me move it. Oh, okay, there we go. There's that scatter brush, which is the leaf. You can see a number of other brushes here that look like charcoal, that look like other things. Here are these banners. Here is another type of pattern here, an ornamental border. So for example, and you can see, if you want, you can look at the top here. Here's a little flyout window with brushes selected. You'll say Open Brush Library, and there's a whole bunch of them, from arrows, artistic, borders. So here's more decorative borders if we want to see these, or frames, or whatever you want. There's a whole bunch of them here. So let me pull this up. So here's a bunch here of different kinds of frames. The same with borders, the other borders. So let me go ahead and start with that. Let's start with building the border here. So all I'm going to do is create and select a rectangle tool. And I don't want to fill, I just want a stroke. Because you'll see that the brushes are applied to strokes, not to fills. So to have a fill for some of these really does you no good. But if I select the wooden frame, it gives me a wooden frame. If I select this little, it looks like it's on the side of a dollar bill or something, this kind of intricate, ornate scroll work. There's a bunch of others here too that are really pretty cool, all of these different kinds of frames. We can look in here. Let me go ahead now and just, we're going to create our own to show you how it's done. So to create that border, you'll notice that they've given us these brushes over here, or not brushes, these brush shapes. They used a brush to create this little circle. See how it looks like it was done with a nice soft brush? The same with this. It looks like it's done with a really loose painterly brush here. Well, in order to create our own brush, we need to turn these into patterns first. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll select it first, and then I'm going to make sure that in swatches I have patterns, or make sure that all of these are here. I want to show all swatches, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to drag it and I'm going to move it in here, and you'll see that it's turned it into a pattern brush. If I were to only look at patterns, pattern swatches, this is the only one I have, and we really haven't talked about patterns yet. But if I were to select this and fill it with a pattern, this pattern, see how it fills multiple times? It fills like a wallpaper. There you go. Okay. So I'm going to do the same for this one. And actually, I should name that. So I'm just going to call it circle. And I'll do the same for this large stroke here. And click and just drag it into here. And it adds it as a pattern fill. Double click on it, and I'll name this one stroke So circle and stroke. So they have names, and you'll see why in a minute. Then what I want to do under brushes, bring up the brush tab, I want to create my own new brush. So some of these icons look familiar to you, should look familiar to you, like the trash can. This little one here is to create a brand new one, and we can edit the other brushes if we have them selected from here. So I want to create a brand new brush, and it will say what kind of brush. Calligraphic, we want a pattern brush. That's what we're going to create here. So I click OK, and it gives me these options. You'll notice at the top there's 5 different choices that we have. Along the straight path, we can specify a particular pattern. So I want the stroke to go in here. Every time it reaches a quarter, whether it be inside or outside, I want the circle. So I can select that one. I really don't need the inside one. And for a variety of other brushes, like if you wanted end caps, so if you were trying to create the look of a rope, and you had a cap at either end that looked like it was the end of the rope, either a frayed edge or it looked like it was, the end of a spirally kind of twisty thing, the way that ropes are, then you could add those. But for right now, we only need the stroke along the length of it, and anytime it abruptly changes corners, then what is it going to look like here? So I'll name it my border, just for the heck of it, and click OK, and that's been added to our borders. See how our pattern brushes here. And I don't need these anymore at the moment, so I'm not going to delete them, but I'll zoom out. I'll go ahead and I'll select this border that or rectangle to which I've applied a border, and now I'll come in here and I'll just select this, and notice how it's applied that border. Every time there's an abrupt change in direction, it puts the little circles, and along the straight paths it stretches out and puts that brush shape. Pretty cool, huh? However, if you didn't have any abrupt change in direction, so if I were to use the pen tool, like right here, and create a path along here and here, okay, and apply this same path, notice that you do not see the end parts because there's no abrupt change in direction. So you can still use that same custom brush that you've made, but you just don't see the end caps. The only time you would is if I were to use the pen tool, click here, and then click here, and then, oh, come on. This should be a nice abrupt change in direction. Let me change the direction here. If it make sure that it has a corner point here. And why aren't you adding it? Well, it made a liar out of me. It should be adding a little circle right here, because there is a strong change in direction, and it's not, and I don't know why. Maybe it really, really has to be an abrupt change in direction. Not sure why it's not doing that. It really should be added here. Well, let me go back a few steps and we'll do some other ones. Okie doke, you asked about the little pattern that we added in here. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to start with a basic rectangle, but this time I don't want a stroke, I just want a fill. And I'll make a nice, for grass, a nice green fill, and make a rectangle here, like so. And it does just what you might think. It fills it with a solid shape. But what we can do with this selected is we can go under Effect. And now what we're going to do, I got to find which one it is here. It was, oh, I can't remember under which thing it is. Brush strokes. Oh, come on. Style on, no. It's under here, one of these. Path, distort. I can't remember which one it is. Brush strokes, spatter, spray, angled crosshatch, angled stroke, distort, pixelate, no. Sharpen, sketch, no. Stylize, no. Texture, no. Okay, which one is it under? Okay, let me go under object. Let me try a different route here. Filter, stylize, distort, twist, zigzag, free, pucker, dilute. I thought it was under stylize. Okay, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to go back here. I'm going to select this one. It's scribble under effects. So where the heck is scribble under effects? Half the time you have to figure out where the heck these things are. And I'm probably looking right at it and not seeing it. Oh, right here. I was right. It's under stylize and scribble is at the bottom. And there's the default settings. And notice it now looks like you've taken a marker and rubbed it across a little, felt tip marker at an angle. So we can control the angle from here. If you want them straight up and down at a 90-degree angle. If you want them to look like they're done at the side, we can do that. Let's make it, just for the heck of it, 90 degrees. So that's up and down. We can control the path overlap, whether we want some or not. It's centered right now. And this means how much of it do you want it to overlap the shape? Outside, see how it goes way beyond the shape? And if we say inside, it's almost invisible now. So it stays within the confines of the shape or it goes outside the shape. So we'll keep it 0 for right now. Whatever the settings are that they specify in the book, we can do that. Again, we can vary the width. We can make it pretty consistent by adjusting this. We can also control the stroke width. Do we want them to vary? Tweaking that. We can adjust curviness a little bit here. Variation in width. Spacing. Loose versus tight. So when you're working on your own and you're not following the textbook, you can sit and tinker with this as much as you like until you get the desired result. I'm going to go back and adjust the variation a little bit. Stroke width. So it's a little bit fatter than what we had. Changes pretty abruptly. I don't want too much in the way of curviness. I want it to look like grass. So we're going to go from maybe more of a sketchy path overlap. Want it pretty centered. Variation, I'm going to minimize that too. A little bit more than that. It's too perfect. Stroke width, maybe a little bit. No, that looks pretty good. Curviness, let's take all of the curviness out of it. Variation. That looks pretty good. Tight, loose, that looks pretty good. So this is another thing that isn't really a brush, but it creates the illusion of brush types. I'm going to go ahead and move this to the side since I went out of order. And now what we're going to do is we're going to create the trees, and we'll start by creating the trees and the leaves. And now we're just going to use some traditional brushes. And again, the fill that we use really isn't going to help us, so I don't want to fill. I'm going to select a stroke, and just for the heck of it, I'm going to select a black stroke to start with. And then we will change it. I'm going to come in here, and you can see that we have charcoal, we have charcoal feather. There's a variety of these. Which one is this? Chalk. We have, this one is a nice one. Feud. Just looks basically like a brush. I'm just going to go back and I'm going to select the charcoal here. Feather. And by using the brush tool, which is the one that looks like a brush over to the left, it's the 5th one down, we can click and drag, and we don't have to be really that accurate. And it creates the brush for us. What we can also do is I'm going to go ahead and click to deselect it, and I'm going to go ahead and click some of the others and drag, hold down the command key and click to deselect it. Because if you don't deselect them, this is what can happen. I'm going to click and drag, and then if I overlap the brush with another one, watch what happens. See how it just changes direction? So if I hold down the command key and click, it deselects it, and then I can click and drag on top of it, and that allows me to overlap them. So hold down the command key, click, deselects, and then we can click and drag again. Click and drag, and we're just creating some branches here is all we're doing. Now, what if I decide I want a different color for these branches? If I want a different thickness, if I want to do something different with it rather than just use the black. To do that, let me go ahead and finish these up first, and then you get the basic idea here. Okay, so if I decide later on, let's go ahead and select just one of these, that I decided later on that I want a different thickness and or I want a different color for this. Well, what I can do is double click. Actually, I got to double click on the brush with that selected. And now what I can do, actually, let me change the color first. Let me select this fill color to more of a brownish color, like so. I want that to be the color. Notice that it changes here, but what if I want all the others to change? So I'll deselect, and I'll double click on the brush. Now from here I can change the width proportionately. So if I want it, right now it's at 100%, but let's look at it at 200%. And here's the preview. See how everything is much thicker now? You can make them thinner, thicker. You can change the direction of them. What we can also do is switch from none to hue shift. Okay? And what I want is to pick the color key, which should be from here, and I could click OK, and I want it to apply to all strokes. So now, let me do this again. I selected the wrong color. Never mind. I goofed. I shouldn't have to select them all. Let me do it again. U shift, and I don't want this color. Let me go back and let me click on the color that I want here. So there's my brown. They've all changed because I had them all selected. So let me change the color again. Let me change it to maybe a little bit lighter greenish brown. So now it doesn't change, but if I double click in here and I do a hue shift and I preview, cross my fingers, click on the color key will be from the eyedropper. Click OK, and it didn't do it. Well, I messed up. I'm sure I'm clearly doing something out of order. But now when you select any of them, since I've selected U-Shift, you can always go back and select them and change the color and make whatever color you want for these. Okay? So these are your traditional brushes that look like regular brushes. The next one will be the scatter brush, and that's what we're going to use to create the leaves. Let me try to find this here. It's back up here. So in a similar fashion, what I'm going to do is select the brush tool again, and they have just a whole bunch of scribbly lines along here. And notice that it doesn't adhere to the brown, it adheres to the red, the one that was assigned to it when they made it. And that's fine. I'm going to go ahead and make a bunch of these. Again, hold down the command key and click. Hold down the command key and click to deselect, and I'm just randomly drawing here, and because it places them in random directions, it looks a little bit more. You don't have to be accurate. You don't want to be accurate. To find out what it's doing with these, again, you double click on the brush itself. You'll notice that it's named Fall Leaf. We can vary the size, and right now it's varying from 60% to 100%. So the 100% of the original size that was used when they created a pattern with that brush. The spacing, again, do you want it at 100%, the actual size of the brush or the pattern, and then it can be closer together but not any farther. If I want them randomly farther apart, I can also increase it. And you'll notice how it's changing them on the fly here.
It doesn't really draw them on the actual path.
Huh?
Right?
They're actually, they're attached to that path. And you can see how we can randomize rotation, the scattering, and the spacing, and the sizing. So there are all these 4 factors, and it does make it look pretty random when you're doing that. Especially if we tweak the sizes. You can see how some are big, some are small, and change that. So again, let's switch again to U-Shift. Let's try this again. I'm going to try this again this time. And I click OK. And I want to leave strokes or apply to strokes. So if I want them all to change, notice that they're all now going to change to the color that I had. This is what I was trying to do with these down here. Had in my stroke color in the bottom, I can say leave strokes, or I can apply to all strokes, and then every time I create a new one, so let's apply to this. Every time I create a new one or I select the stroke, I can now, as I was doing before, select these individual ones and we can apply different colors to them. Okay? So we can get our kind of autumn effect here. Okay. Let's put this back up here and send it behind. Object arrange, send back. So it's behind the tree. What we can also do is, so far I have not applied a fill to any of these. Let me go ahead and select a color for, let's look at, what do I want? I want swatches. I don't have any in here. I want kind of a tan color, because I'm going to do the boat next, or I can do the wavy lines next. Let's just do the wavy lines. So let me pick a blue from here. Again, I'm going to pick the stroke color. And let's pick a different kind of brush. This one will be a calligraphic brush now, where it goes from thick, thin, thick, thin. We're going to look back at the brushes, if I can find them here. Where are they? Okay, window, brushes is closed, so it's not up. There we go. So by scrolling down, maybe it was up here. There we go. Here's one here, which is a 40-point flat at a slight angle. So if I double click on that, you can see how we can control the angle of the brush from here. We can control the variation, again, randomness, the roundness. It's only 10% round. What if I wanted it rounder? If it were 100%, you just get a round brush. So that's what it's going to paint with. It's going to look like a regular round brush. But by leaving it at 10% and leaving it at an angle, you get that calligraphic effect, because as it moves and it's steady along there, you get the thick thin as you would with a calligraphic pen. I'm just going to leave that as is. It's probably too thick, but that's okay. I'm going to use the brush tool, and I'm just going to draw along here, and you'll see that I get the thick thin. And I'm not drawing very well with this. But that's okay, because if you don't draw well with the mouse, then what you can do instead, if you would rather work with the pen tool, then that would work nicely too. You don't have to use the brush tool to apply a brush to it. I can go back with the pen tool, and just as we had done before, I can click, pull in a direction. You know, this is what we had done, several lessons ago. And I'm clicking and pulling and dragging so that it goes in the same direction as my little waves here. And I finish it off like so. And then when I'm done, I have the colors selected, and then what I can do is come back and apply the brush. And again, if that's too thick, if it's not exactly the way you want the path, you can adjust the path. I can double click on the brush. 40 pixels is maybe the diameter is too much. Let's try that. 27, let's drop it down maybe to 20. That looks pretty good with preview turned on. I want it to apply to the strokes. And then again, just like any other path, because this is an editable path, I can option, drag, and make copies of it. Okay. Huh? To repeat it, option. Hold down the option key and then click and drag and you make a copy of it. This one, where they've actually made the boat with the brush, is that they have used a stroke and a fill. So how that works, we don't need to go into detail with that because that's pretty much the end of the exercise, is we can take one of these pointy brushes that's pointy at the front and the back, and I don't see the one that I want here. So I'm going to go ahead and load some more brushes. Let's use the fly out window, open brush library. I want artistic. How about artistic brushes? Just brush here and see what we get. And I don't want to change that, so if I have something selected, that's not good because it will change everything. Well, these are not in the direction I wanted to go, so let's try again. And let's try a different, maybe it would be a pen brush. So let's open brush library. How about artistic ink brushes? That's what I want. I want it thin, how it tapers at either end. So this is the one I'm going to select, and now I can either draw with the pen tool first, or if you would rather draw with the the brush tool, you can. But unfortunately, unless you have a stylus, it's kind of hard to draw with the mouse and be accurate. For whatever reason, I'm left-handed, and I do just about everything left-handed, but I hold the mouse in my right hand. And so when I go to draw, even when I try to draw with my left hand, it feels really awkward. If I use a Wacom tablet with a stylus, I use my left hand. I don't use the right hand. So I don't know, maybe I'm ambidextrous or something, I don't know. But what we can do to draw the boat is we're going to draw the top part of the boat first, and we want this to be filled in with a color. So I am going to go ahead and make sure that I have a dark color for the stroke, maybe a dark brown here. And then I want maybe a light color, more of a yellow color for the, not that yellow, for the fill. And again, I'll make sure that I select the taper brush. And let's zoom in so we can see what we're doing here. Select the brush tool. And now I click and I drag and I try to follow this as carefully as possible. Not doing too bad a job. I probably need to fix it. And I just get a stroke because it didn't come back on itself. So even though I have a fill, there is no stroke. But now watch, I'm going to come back again. I'm going to go ahead and put that in there. See how that starts to fill with the stroke? So I'm going to leave that way for right now. Hold down the command key, deselect. Now I'm going to apply. Now watch what happens. When I click and I drag, and I make an abrupt change in direction and I come back, like so, on itself. It didn't do it. There we go. Now I have the fill. Well, it's not complete. Notice it's open at either end. But what it does try to do is it does try to fill the beginning and end points. from those 2 points. So it's not perfect. But if you want it to look more like it was done with a brush, then you can come back and you leave that, and it is just fills to that point, you know, between these 2 endpoints. So it is somewhat, you know, it's an okay solution for that. And now that it's deselected, I can come back again. We can turn that off so that I don't have a fill. Use the brush tool again so that it's tapered on either end. And with the brush selected, where's the brush tool? Right there. Click and drag, and click and drag. Deselect first. Click and drag. So you can see what they've done here. They also have a little chain. Now, I'm going to look in theirs. And it used to be a part of this, and why it's not in here now. They have, this is another pattern fill brush. And this is what they've used to make the chain. They used to actually have a rope, but they kind of cheated. They changed it. But you can see that if we double click on here, that for the long stroke corners and the inside corners, they've used the same shape in here, which is original. It's just a little circle with a square in it that looks like a link of a chain. And they're using that and making sure that they space it accordingly so that it overlaps, and it looks pretty much like a chain when you're done. It's not perfect, but it's not a bad solution, so that you don't have to go in here and create a path or create multiple shapes and then try to string them together. We could have used the blend tool, but in this particular case, creating our own custom brush would actually probably be better because then we can string the path wherever we want, and those links automatically follow that. And as you can see, if we look in here, if we look at a, oh shoot, let's look at swatches, and why isn't it here? Why wouldn't it be here? It should be here. Well, let me go back over here and let's try to make our own. So I'll start by creating a circle. So this will be part of the chain link, like so. And I want that to be a fill. And then on top of that, I will make the white rectangle. And let me deselect this so that on top we use a white rectangle here. Same as what they've done here. Okay? And let me go ahead and select these. Whoops, I didn't want to do that. Select these and group them. And then I'm going to drag it in here so it becomes a pattern. And then I'm going to go ahead and name the pattern. We'll call it chain. Whoops. Chain or link. Okay. You can see how it's already using it as a pattern in there. Now what I can do is I can select brushes, and let's create our own brush. So where did I put brushes? Brushes, brushes, brushes. Brushes is here. And I'm going to create a brand new one, and I want this to be a new pattern brush, just like we had done at the very beginning. Click OK. And I'm going to go ahead and use, why isn't it here? Is it circle? No. Pattern. There we go. I thought I named it. And we're going to do the same for this. Okay. And now we'll go ahead and use the brush tool. And there's our chain. So it's a little bit, in some respects, it's even better than using the blend tool to string beads, because they're automatically, string together really nicely.
Can you create it like in one of the links with using the pathfinder tool and then still save it as a pattern?
should, yeah. You just have to turn it into a pattern first. And to turn it into a pattern, you take whatever it is you've created and drag it into that pattern library and your pattern palette, and it turns it into one. It will let you know if what you've done to it is not acceptable. Oftentimes with patterns, you can't put gradients in there, things like that. But there's all sorts of other things you can do. Because one of the things that we haven't covered yet are symbols. Symbols are like little library items of illustrations you've made, which are really pretty cool. So if you're for an illustrator and you use the same kind of item often, and you have you want a library, let's say you draw flowers a lot and you have a library of roses and daisies and daffodils or whatever, you can make a whole library of them, and then you can paint with those. And it's almost like an airbrush. It's spraying all of those images. So you don't have to, use them one at a time. You can spray a whole forest of trees or a whole field of flowers in a very short amount of time. It's pretty cool. It's on the order of this, but it's slightly different. But anyway, these are brushes. And again, what they're designed to do is it's still all vector. But it's designed to make what is vector look a little bit more like something that's hand-drawn or painted, but still have the control over the paths as you would with any other Bezier path. That straight line that you drew with the pen tool, it's really no different. What I think they work nicely with is either sort of a refined version of this. So it would look somewhat like a quick sketch. If you've ever seen marker sketches, they're meant to look loose. They're not meant to be tight, but there is a controlled look to them, but they look spontaneous. And I think that's sort of the feel that you get from that. I personally also like them to be used as a nice contrast to the pen tool, the straight line of the pen tool, so that if you have a nice rough texture of charcoal against something that's smooth, the pen tool, you get a texture contrast now too, which is nice, that we haven't really talked about too much. And you could do that with fills and patterns and things like that, where you get smooth versus rough. And that can really enhance your illustration quite a bit, where if it's predominantly drawn with a pen tool, and you get all of these really precise lines that are, they are drawn with a machine is what they are. They're just absolutely precise. And then next to some of those lines, you have some to which you've applied the brush tool that looks like charcoal, it looks like watercolor or something. You get this nice contrast between the two, the juxtaposition of the two, the smooth against the rough, and it really makes for an interesting piece. It's a part of design, and I think that you should, in any kind of illustration you do, always look to complement, think in terms of complements. Light versus dark, smooth versus rough. Think in terms of complementary colors, yellow versus violet, red versus green, blue versus orange, that sort of thing. And the more of that you have, not a lot, but if you think in those terms and have some complements with one another, and a range of complements, it really, I think, will bring life to your pieces. Okay? So that's the brush tool. And this Thursday, you do not have to do exercise 11. I will talk about that a little bit. It says applying effects. I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to show you some Linda Wyman videos. And also, I do want to talk about effects, but you really don't have to do that exercise. Where if you want to do it, and it's a little citrus soap and stuff, I think is really kind of silly. Only because I don't think it's a good example of a quality illustration. There is an important distinction between filters and effects, and when, I will explain those in detail, and we'll talk about those so you understand them. Because you may have already noticed that when you use effects sometimes, that when it redraws, it takes time to redraw your illustration. If you're not careful, it can also cause your computer to crash and to choke when you print. Anyway, we don't have too many more exercises to do in the book, and then just a couple. And then after that, I'm just going to show you more lynda.com videos and things like that that are extra. Anybody interested in web design? Sort of. How about 3D modeling, 3D? Well, when they use, in the next exercise, they use the effects to try to create this illustration of soap. And I think there are better programs, better tools to do that, and a 3D modeling program would be a better way to go. What we might do, I'll see if we have Lightwave installed here, and if it doesn't work here, then we can all go next door. And I will do basically the same thing. I should do this in my Photoshop class too. To create a basic shape and to use some of the mapping techniques that are available in 3D modeling to show you how you can take a simple primitive like a box or a cylinder and apply some elaborate maps to them to make it look like a real can of Coke or a real box of cereal or something like that. Not something that looks hokey, but I mean looks really believable without a lot of muss or fuss. And what makes it advantageous to do some of these things and not everything in a 3D modeling program is that because you are in a virtual 3D environment, you can view that box or whatever you create from any point of view. See, when you're working in Illustrator, once you do an illustration and someone says, I really like to see that toy that you did from the other side, you have to redraw it, don't you? And you probably need another photograph or you need another drawing in order to do that. It takes a lot of work. Well, once you build something in 3D, you just simply rotate it, or you take the camera, the virtual camera in there, and move it from to another angle and take another snapshot of it. And then you can also adjust the lighting, because what 3D modeling programs do is they try to emulate the real world, how the real world works. There's any number of lights that are available to you, from linear lights, which are similar to the fluorescent lights we have, to point lights, which are like incandescent lights, to distant lights, which are like the sun. You know, and you get all the different kinds of effects that you would in lighting situations that you would in the real world with those different lights. And it really brings the whole thing to life. It's amazing, because what you're doing is you're creating a virtual world is what you're doing, and simulating what you see in the real world. And some of the things do not take that long. Some things take a long time. I'm not going to kid you that they can be very tedious. But some of the things that they're having us do on here and in the Photoshop class could be very easily done in the 3D modeling program, and you get much better results. Much better. So if you know just a little bit of 3D modeling, I think you'd be better off in some cases. You could do some nice things. Mm-hmm.
You like this one better than Strata?
Yeah, it is better. Strata bothered me with organic modeling. It just couldn't handle it. And when you want to work more with like clay-like shapes and build that way, it relied too much. Strata Studio Pro relied too much on Boolean modeling, and there's too many limitations with that these days. For what it is, though, it's a good program. It's a great starter program, I think.
You ever play with Cheetah?
No, I haven't. There's lots of good ones, though. Let's see, what have I used? Used Form Z, Strata Studio Pro, Lightwave. I played around a little bit with, there's another one that's really popular right now, high-end, and I can't think of what it is. I'm drawing a blank at the moment. There's some other ones, and I can't think of the name of it. Maybe one of you guys know. It creates virtual environments with, you know, rolling hills and water and grass and all kinds of stuff. It's pretty cool. can't think of the name of it. It's been so long since I've used it, can't think of what it is. It's really pretty nifty. But you can do that in Lightwave too. Create your own rolling hills and stuff like that, and put grass on it and everything. There's some neat things. Okay, so I mean, I think that's worth covering before the end of the semester. You can see some other options that mostly if you haven't already gathered, what Illustrator is good for are technical drawings and stylized illustrations. And the third thing would be if you design one-sheets, ads, brochures, things like that. It does a really good job of all of those. If you want a realistic, photographic look, then use Photoshop. If you want to have a more three-dimensional look, then you need to go in the 3D world and work with that. But most things in here, especially this, look 2D and flat and graphic. And that is a legitimate look to illustration and drawings and stuff. And some people fall into that category and that group a little bit more naturally than the others. It is probably one of the most widely used programs around. So, any questions about what I've covered today? No? Okay. Let me put your grades in the grade book and then I will hand them out. Okay? That's it for today.